We're all ready to go. Welcome,
All
everybody.
right, look at everybody coming in. Great to see you all. Here we are again talking about ethical storytelling. So pumped to have you all. So pumped to have our great guests. All right, everybody coming in. All right, well, we're going to go ahead and get started because we have a very action-packed hour. But we'll do some administrative stuff first. So my name is Chris Miano, and I'm the founder of MemoryFox. And this is another Narratives with Integrity event. For those who are returning, welcome back. And for those who are here for the first time, thank you so much for joining us, and we're so glad to have you. I'd love to see where y'all joining us from. So go ahead and let us know your organization in the chat. That's always fun. I think we're all united here by a common interest in telling our stories ethically. So it's good to see who else shares those common values. Special thanks and gratitude, of course, to our esteemed panelists for taking the time to share their insights about collecting and sharing stories with anonymous storytellers. This is a very challenging topic. And today we're going to ask our panelists some very challenging questions. Questions that were submitted by you to people in the audience, so that will help all of us tell stories more ethically. So really great, and thank you to everybody who submitted. There were over 100 questions submitted. We tried to take them and narrow them down a little bit so that they would kind of represent the sector as a whole. But a lot of great questions, and we're so excited to get into them. Thank you, of course, to Carly Euler, our intrepid marketing director, for putting this all together. Thank you so much. We're so lucky to have you on the team. This session is being recorded and will be sent to everyone who registered within 24 hours of the event. Be on the lookout for an email from Carly pretty soon afterwards. So now we will go ahead and we will introduce today's panelists. First, we have Daria Ford, who I had the pleasure of meeting at the 2024 RAISE conference. Daria Ford serves as the Chief Advancement Officer for the Martha O'Brien Center in Nashville, Tennessee. She brings 20 years of nonprofit experience. Her expertise spans programs expansion, grant administration, executive leadership, and fund development. Daria's career has been marked by her exceptional ability to lead and motivate teams, strategic thinking, and building relationships with organizational stakeholders. It is so nice to see you again, Daria. Next, I'd like you to meet Holly. Holly Beach is the communications manager at the Idaho Office for Refugees, which provides resources and programs to new Idahoans who were forced to leave their former homes. Part of her work includes hosting the Mosaics podcast, where she interviews Idahoans who lived refugee experience, as well as community members who are building a culture of belonging. She is the former managing editor of the Idaho Press, where she worked for a decade. It is so awesome to have you here today, Holly. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Next, I'd like to introduce one of our MemoryFox storytellers, Jennifer. Jennifer Simmons Kaliba is the Vice President of Communications at RANN, the leading national nonprofit committed to supporting survivors of sexual violence. She has spent 25 years helping nonprofits drive action on issues ranging from childhood hunger to transportation reform to mental health. She has led award-winning social impact campaigns, worked with Fortune 100 companies and global nonprofits to expand awareness and support of humanitarian and environmental causes. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for what you do. Finally, we have the great Maria Bryan joining us for the second time as a panelist. So wonderful to have you again. Maria Bryan is a trauma-informed storytelling trainer and the founder of Maria Bryan Creative. She helps nonprofit leaders tell powerful and impactful stories that do no harm. Maria has over 15 years in marketing communications in the public sector and is professionally certified in trauma and resilience and somatic embodiment and regulation. She is also the host of the When Bearing Witness podcast, which is amazing, where she explores trauma-informed storytelling, a safe and healthy process of story gathering and telling painful stories. Give it a listen. All right, I think we're ready. That was the hard part, is getting through all that. Now I shut up and just ask questions. So thank you so much for joining us, and let us get to question number 1. All right, so this is from Miriam, and the topic is anonymous storytelling strategies. This is for Daria and Jennifer. I know that withholding the name of the respondent helps to ensure privacy. What other methods could be used? And Darren, you
Well,
can go ahead. Yeah, why don't you give us a start?
I'll jump in. I think that withholding the name, but you also could change the name and just notify your population that you're changing it and the reason why. This is a very sensitive topic. We want to make sure that we protect our clients. And so, because of that reason, we're changing the name for the purpose of this story. The story is still real, it's still accurate, the details are accurate, and but that's why we're changing the name. So I think being transparent really helps in that situation.
Yeah, great, 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 great. Jennifer, anything to add with that?
Yeah, I think it's also worthwhile thinking or asking the person who is the story owner to consider what are details about themselves that may be identifying because of the community that they're in. Are you in a smaller town? Are you speaking about yourself in ways that there are kind of triangulation factors that would give your identity away, even if you do change the name? Sometimes just having that kind of conversation can help as thought starters because you think of your name as the only protector of your anonymity, and there are other factors too.
Yeah, great, great, great. Those are great tactical answers. I think hopefully everybody finds that helpful. There's the next topic we want to get into is story collection strategy. Now this is going to be for Holly and then Maria. And this is from Jamila. What safeguards do you recommend for your staff across departments to ensure anonymity when working with clients? I feel it's a sort of an expansion on that first one a little bit.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if you could maybe explain that more. Is the protection like for your staff or making sure that they're anonymous even among? I was a little bit confused about that.
Yeah, yeah. So what, like, kind of, what do you recommend to your staff so that they're making sure that
Oh,
the
yeah.
name doesn't leak out? You're the one that collects the story, and then you have the marketing, coordinator
Yeah,
who's sharing it. Like, what kind of sort of safeguards can you put in place to make sure that that
make
kind
sure
of
it's
doesn't
not.
happen?
No, that's a really good point. And I'm lucky to work on a pretty small team. So for us, it is like in our huddles and our meetings and our
Like, hey,
messages, like
yeah.
this is not to be out there in public. But I can imagine on a larger team, you might need to have stricter policies in place. But yeah, it is that clear conversation, clear communication with our team about the importance that this does not leave this room, who this is.
When you worked as a reporter, were there any specific ways that you guys did it that might be helpful, to learn from?
Yeah, it's interesting to switch from reporting to nonprofit storytelling because as nonprofits, we have so much more leeway and ability to provide that privacy to folks. I know as a reporter, the big concern is usually credibility. You want to use it very rarely if you're going to offer anonymity to maintain that transparency and trust. I think with nonprofits, we do have there's greater ability to offer people that, to offer them more control over their story. So that's kind of been a fun switch for me, honestly, to
Yeah,
have.
yeah, I
Yeah.
bet. And I bet you take a lot of that experience with you. Maria, anything to add there?
Yeah, I think one thing is don't, especially when you do work with bigger teams, don't assume that folks will keep stories anonymous. So have trainings, have actual team trainings where you are letting people know. We need to be very, especially if you're working with minors, any kind of vulnerable population. I spent 5 years working in immigrant communities who were very fearful of having their, identity shown being associated with the health center. So we did a lot of trainings. There was one time where we did a huge photo shoot, and one of the models who had fully given consent retracted, right? And so this is a good example of this now image being highly accessible to a lot of staff, and suddenly she retracted wanting her image being used. So we had to really do our due diligence. Where in the public is this so we can take it down? Where internally is it so we can take it down? And we had to communicate with anyone who had access to that image because we have our fundraising team, our marketing team, communications, health education. Everyone's using these images. So lastly, I would say, is there a way to safeguard files as well? So if you have a library of images or a library of stories. Who has access to that? Maybe you want to be password protecting that. So the marketing intern doesn't accidentally, have access to an image that we know should be used for internal purposes, but not for external purposes.
Well, you'd probably think how many hard drives are filled with content, like very sensitive, a veteran maybe crying about, something, and it's just sitting on people's hard drives in their houses,
Right.
yeah, that's great. I want to dig more into that one later because I feel like that's a really good one, and I'm obsessed with that one. Okay, this next one is about visual storytelling strategy. This is from Ashlyn. And this will be again from Maria, and she has an example she's going to share, and then we'll go ahead and or talk about, and then we'll go through all the others. Now, when sharing an anonymous story, what kind of images or visuals do you think would be respectful and help convey the message without compromising privacy? And I think, well, Maria, you want to get us going,
Yeah.
and then Carly
Oh,
will
what
get
a
that
great,
video going.
yeah, juicy question. Carly's going to pull up my favorite composite story. So we can tell really beautiful, creative, emotionally driven, impactful stories without putting someone right in front of a camera. So let's start with, we're just watched a minute of this video. This is going to talk about sexual violence. So if you don't have capacity for that, maybe just put us on, check out just for a minute or two. But an example of telling client stories without sharing any identity in a way that I felt is very positive. So yeah, Carly, let's see if folks can see this.
4 months ago, I was at the lowest point of my life. I had just left my abusive husband, and my kids and I had nowhere safe to go. That's when I called New York City's domestic violence hotline, who told me about Sanctuary for Families and their shelter services.
2 years ago, I fled violence and discrimination in my home country. After arriving in the United States, I met a guy who became my boyfriend. It was a dark time. He exploited me by selling me for sex and threatened to deport me if I didn't do what he said. Back then, I didn't even know that what he was doing to me was a crime. But with help from Sanctuary for Families, I finally understood that I had rights.
Siempre tuve grandes sueños, pero mi pareja no me dejaba estudiar o trabajar. Él quería asegurarse que yo dependiera de él para tener dinero. Cuando mi consejera en Santuario para Familias me refirió al programa de empoderamiento económico, me di cuenta de que aún estaba a tiempo de retomar el control de mi futuro.
Wow.
Thank you so much, Carly. Okay,
Beautiful.
we'll put the link in there so you can watch the full thing, because we actually just paused right as we're kind of getting this tour of the center, and there's smiling faces waving, and you get to see the office where you can kind of come in and get some work done, where you can kind of go get clothes for your baby. It's clean, it feels safe, it feels really friendly. And then we kind of continue on with these stories, and we don't know who these people are. So I also love, and I'm going to share a few links in a moment to kind of stir some inspiration, but comic books, like comic strips. What a great way to show very simple transformation without giving away detailed, any kind of illustration or whiteboarding that you can do.
Really
You
fun
can
idea.
also do silhouettes. You can show actual pictures of program participants, but using just their back or their hands, any kind of project. So if you are working with youth, you can be showing them doing artwork, but you're only really showing their hands and arms. And I would just say there's a way to do this that kind of feels moody, and there's ways to do silhouettes that feel empowering and positive and hopeful. So be mindful of that. So I will let Chris go to the next question, but I'm going to throw a few more links in of examples of organizations that I think are doing this really well visually.
Yeah, before we do go on, I
Yeah.
do want to know if anybody else does have anything to add to. I'm sure you've all have experiences with it where times where you had to do it. Maybe you can share some great some examples that worked for you or ideas you've had. Maybe we'll start Daria, Jennifer, Holly, anybody?
Yeah, I know for us, we would have a photographer, maybe the person was in their kitchen cooking or doing something that's natural to them, and it wasn't their face, but it was, yeah, the hands or some part that's not going to identify them. I also like when someone's quote is maybe highlighted in the post instead of a face. And then I got a fundraising letter from a homelessness prevention organization in my city, and they used the little girl's drawing, and that was like the front of their postcard, and like, you helped Stephanie
Very
stay
cool.
housed. I'm like, that is so special to have her drawing. So something like that is also impactful.
Yeah, that's really, really good. Thank you for sharing that one. That makes me a little sad. But no, that's beautiful stuff. Anybody else at all? Otherwise, we will go on to the next question. Cool. All right. Well, this one is about consent. And this is from Heidi. Holly, we'll go back to you, and then any others to join. If you anonymize a story, maybe you can expand on it more than just yes or no, but if you anonymize a story, do you still need permission from the person?
Yes, definitely. I just imagine how I would feel if actually, this has happened to me before. A pastor shared my story, didn't use my name, wasn't a flattering story. And my roommate came back and said, that they just told a story about you because she knows me. And it was awful. And I never ever, even if it was a positive story, I never want someone to feel surprised or used. So even if it's anonymous, if there's anything in there that could, I mean, it's their story. So the partnership is always where the power comes in, even if it is anonymous storytelling. So you need to be partners in it, regardless.
Anything to expand on that at all, Daria?
I was just gonna say, I think that's really just the purpose of consent. It's just making sure that we're all clear about where, what, and how we're gonna use the story. And so I think anytime that you can go over that consent process form, it just strengthens your organizational storytelling.
Yeah, it's about you're also demonstrating commitment to your community that we're a good handler of stories. And any opportunity to do that is always good to build that culture of storytelling. No, that's great. Okay, cool. Going on to another question about consent, and this is for Daria and Jennifer. This is from Allison. How do you ensure individuals fully understand and can consent to what they're being asked, especially if you're trying to convince them to tell their story? What adjustments do you make when dealing with minors, for example? And we'll start with Daria.
I'll take the first part first. I think that one, I don't think you could talk about it enough. So you, one, have to have a process within your organization. And so having a process will help you be consistent. You'll talk about consent. You'll talk about it at multiple points in time. And then you'll check in. Are you still comfortable with going forward with your story? You can turn around at any point in time. We don't have to continue this process. I think just having those points in time in place and a process will help you make sure that you're fully covering what consent means. And that means saying things like, this will be posted online. People will see this story. Are you comfortable with that? So that they fully are aware that I'm making a news article that I plan to post online. Thousands of people will see it. So they know how big it gets. Because I think at first, people want to do great things and they want to tell their story. And so they're going to say, oh, yeah, sure, I want to help you, because a lot of times they have commitment to help us. But then when you take a step back, they're like, wait a minute, everybody in my town may see this. I don't know if I thought about it that way. And it's our job to make sure that we fully inform them to think about what are the implications of telling the story.
Right.
Yeah, I think when you consider particularly the different places that a story shows up, and you think about social media. So, in past career lives where we've told stories where maybe the child isn't the direct beneficiary, it's the parent, and it's that kind of relationship, and the parents have given consent. And we've told stories about kids. I think about this now, and 20 years on, I wonder, did we make the right choices? Maybe 20 years ago, this child wouldn't have shown up on social media, but today, for sure. And, what is that going to be as they continue to grow and face identification software becomes easier and more accessible? What does that mean when somebody else gives consent for your story? So at RAIN, when we talk about stories right now, we don't tell stories of children because children can't legally consent. Full stop, no other questions there. And you want to ensure that if that child is, or that person is telling their story, that they fully own it and are fully aware of it. So we've had to start thinking about how we can, because first of all, sexual abuse for children is a, more than 50% of the people who come to our hotline, are the National Sexual Assault Hotline, who come to our hotline are children. We don't ask for any kind of IPP or anything like that, nothing that lets us know in any fill out form that these are children, but there are questions that through assessments we can understand, mentions of babysitters, mentions of teachers, kind of indicators that say that you are a child when you come. So if you think about that in terms of volume, and think about that, the statistics have about 15% of children are the victims of sexual assault, but we know it's dramatically underreported, right? We have to start telling these stories. So one of the things we're talking about is, what is the role of the person who is receiving these stories on the hotline? What is their role as advocates for children to share in this world composite stories, or to be that kind of advocate? We're not going to bring a child up onto Capitol Hill to say, please strengthen laws against child sexual assault material online. But we could bring somebody up onto the Hill who is a direct supporter of children on the hotline to say, these are the stories I hear every day. And trying to build that kind of, in some ways it's also building an advocacy group of adults for kids as well too. It's very difficult, but we have to be able to tell these stories in respectful ways.
Yeah, wow, that's very beautifully put. So all right, well, cool. I think that's a really, really important topic, and I love, we always talk about it personally here at MemoryFox, because it is so interesting and so important now more than ever. So next topic will be about changing identifying info, and this is more of like a practical question, and I love these ones. This is from Heidi, and this is for Maria and others to chime in. How far do we need to go in actually changing the details? At what point does an anonymized story become nobody's story? I think that's a really interesting
such a good
kind of
question.
practical way of looking at it.
Right. My mind is kind of speeding because of what Jennifer I'm still
know,
like
me
in
too.
Jennifer's comment. But it'll lead to this. I love this question, and there's so much nuance in anonymous storytelling. I also saw that someone had a question here on can we make up a story, even if it's not true, but it kind of gets to the point of what our services are. And I think to this question's point, when we're telling composite stories, if we're telling the story of 2 people, that's one thing. If we're telling the story of 30 people, like, is this a story? And I want to address the fears behind this. With the, AI and deep fakes, people are feeling a little bit ick and scared about fake storytelling and fake information. So I think this is a really valid question, where we want to first and foremost protect our story owners, especially our most vulnerable story owners. But we also don't want audiences to kind of roll their eyes. And people are using quite a bit of AI to create video storytelling and things like this. And, it's changing. It's changing very, very quickly. I'm both happy that we have more tools to tell anonymous storytelling, and also vigilant. So with that, and Daria mentioned this too, sometimes you just got to be honest, like, first of all, don't cherry pick the worst of this story and then the best outcome of this story, right? So first you just have to kind of have integrity on how you are stitching together stories. Also, I just want to point out something that Jennifer had said that really stuck with me. Jennifer didn't tell the story of a child who was sexually abused, but she did say that 50% of callers that come in talk about their babysitters and their teachers. I got such a chill down my spine. That is a story. So let's really sit with that we can tell stories like we get 50% of calls where the callers are talking about their babysitters and their teachers, and you get it. You don't need to bring that child to the Capitol for us to get a chill down our spine. So I have heard stories where they were so clearly fake and they were portrayed as real, true stories, and it's annoying. And our audiences are going to get tired of that real quick because of AI. However, we can still be very clear and transparent saying, hey, this is a story that really truly represents what we do. And so I shared a few links of like comic strips. You're not going to look at this comic strip and say, I think this is fake. Like it's so clearly a composite story of patterns, right? So we can do this. We can do this creatively. We can do this well. We can provoke immense emotion without putting vulnerable people in front of the camera. I hope that answers that
No,
question.
that's great. I mean, ethical storytelling, I mean, that's what we talk about is ethical storytelling is a framework to help keep you on track in a lot of ways to
Right.
telling authentic stories. And what do people crave is real, true authenticity. I was reading something the other day from QGive, and they said that the number one reason across all ages that people stop donating to a cause is because they lose trust in that cause, which I thought that sort
Right.
of surprised me, but I guess it should make sense. And if you violate that, so there is like a business outcome to ethics. And I think that's an important thing to drive home. So thank you for that, Maria. I think
Yeah.
that's a really great expansion on that. Um, Anything else at all? Anybody have anything to add to that? It was very beautifully put. Well, cool. All right. So let me see the next question. Okay, so next question. This is about more broadly anonymous storytelling strategies, and this is from Michelle. This is for Daria and Maria. My organization struggles with storytelling because for legal reasons, even our communications and development teams cannot know all of the details of our work with clients. How can we create compelling stories without that information? Or do you have any suggestions about other directions we could possibly go to help us seem less sterile and vague and more human? That's a great question.
Go ahead, Daria. You can kick us off.
I worked, that's been a good part of my career working for a nonprofit law firm, which probably it's similar. And what I really had to work on was trust within the team to get access to the story. So we could tell the stories because everyone has a right to tell their story. But the issue was that we didn't have process and procedures in place that made our attorneys feel comfortable on top of the additional issues that come with storytelling. And so we had to take a step back and start doing trainings internally to say, here's our process. This is what we do with stories. This is how we're going to address them. This is how we're going to make sure that facts and details don't get out about the stories. And we're going to be consistent with doing that. And so we also needed to do the trainings, and that really changed the culture of the storytelling. And then we went into the consent form. And so I think by going back and making that process, having some procedures in place, it it helped because people can tell their stories if they want to. And so it helped open up that door a bit, but it took some work and it also took time. And I think that's what we have to realize. It takes time to build that kind of trust within your organization. If it's an organization like I came from, a law firm, where they're like, wait a minute, this could change the impact of the case. So we need to think about it. So I think really having those conversations, saying what could we tell? What could we do within the team and being steady could change some things there.
Yeah, really good.
Yeah, Daria, that hits so close to home because I've worked in public health for a long time and we always had to be so cautious. And I know we have a lot of marketers and fundraisers in the house, and I know it can be really, really frustrating to get stories for program staff and we feel like the enemy. And now I'm kind of on the other side as a trainer because now I feel like they're our biggest gift, right? That they are the ones that are so fiercely protective of the people that we are working with. I challenge you in two different ways to tell stories a little bit differently. One is you might be working with folks that you'll never have their identity, but likely if you are serving them right now, it is not a good time from a trauma-informed perspective to tell their story. They are in it. So if there, and you don't also need to tell 100 stories a year. We can slow down our storytelling, tell fewer stories. And generally speaking, nonprofits that have been around for a few years, there'll be one or two folks that just kind of stick around. Like they've just been so impacted. They want to volunteer, they want to donate. people who've had a few years separate, and not days, y'all, years separated, maybe those are the people that are ready and willing to tell their story, and to start having those conversation with. Does this take more time? Absolutely. But it's worth it. It's worth it because they've had more time to consent and all those kind of legal issues that Daria had mentioned. Maybe they are now adults, they're not children anymore, whatever it may be. These are, to me, they're even more powerful because you've had some transformation likely take place. You've been able to see more of the impact having a little bit more time. And I also just want to mention that, and I'm just going to, highlight again what Jennifer said. You can tell stories. Stories don't have to be so specific, beginning, middle, and end about the people you serve. It can be from the perspective of your founder. Chris has a really powerful story as a vet, and I think that's a big part of the MemoryFox story. And, so what's your founding story? What are the stories of your staff that have been there forever since the beginning? Can we highlight that? Do some throwbacks? I know it gets a little tricky with donor-centric and volunteer-centric stories. I think we can do those ethically. But I love organizations that just tell a ton of volunteer inspiring stories on why they volunteer and how this experience has transformed their lives. So let's look for other mini moments of stories, especially if you are working with folks that are very vulnerable and that we need to be more careful about their identity.
Yeah, great. We actually lovingly call those Springsteen stories, as like stories about your community that aren't necessarily the clients or the people you serve, but it's like
Right.
it's the people there. It's like
Right.
riffing on themes and things like that, and different holidays, and yeah, that's great. And thank you for that, Maria. No, that's great. Thank you for sharing all that. Okay, cool. Next question. This is about adopting a new strategy, and this is from Amy, and this is for Holly and Daria. How do we pivot to anonymous storytelling? Previously, it was okay to name our clients, but recent events make it less safe to do so. I think a lot of organizations are probably feeling that today. So maybe you guys can share a little bit about how to change that in an organization and build those processes. Daria, why don't you get us started? Holly, why don't you get us started?
Thanks, Chris. Although I do love the sound of Daria's voice, so maybe I should let you go first. It just soothes me. Well, and I know this will differ for every organization, but I do try to see anonymous storytelling as the exception and not the norm for us. I know that can't work for everybody, but I do think that especially working in refugee resettlement, immigration, these real human connecting stories are so important. In the kind of work we do, there are people who have resettled for, it's been a while, and they're established and comfortable and are part of our Refugee Speakers Bureau and receive training and want to do this for their own goals. And so we haven't had a lot of situations, honestly, where we need to do anonymous, but there have been times where maybe there's still family overseas we need to think about. Something people will say is, oh, this is on local TV. And I say yes, but it's also going to go on the internet and everybody can see it. One of the stories got screen grabbed by a TikToker overseas, and he was sharing it in his language and misinformation about sources that I had helped connect with the media. So things that you don't always expect to happen. In another case, the person didn't need to be anonymous. They felt safe. But once the story came out, some family members said, you just shared some information about who we're connected with back home in our home country. Those tensions exist here. So they felt, so these things I didn't always foresee, even with that consent. And so I will say there are situations definitely where anonymous storytelling is important, but also as much as you can supplement that with stories where you're able to share, I would do that as well.
Yeah. Great, Daria. Anything to add?
I don't know. Sometimes I think that you just have to be bold and make a decision and just say, you know what, for this and for the protection of our client, this is the choice we're making and why we're doing that. And so I think just going into it and saying, staff, you're going to see stories that are a little bit different from us, and this is why. And then donors, this is why we're choosing to do this right now, and being transparent about why you feel like this is the best decision in that moment. And it's just about being bold and being authentic. I think that will help in those situations.
Yeah, and also putting it in terms that they understand. Talk about, I think we'll get more stories this way, or I think we'll build that trust, we'll build better relationship with our community. And yeah, I think that's great. Yeah, being bold, right? That's a lot of times what it takes.
And sometimes it can be hard when you're dealing with
Yeah.
your leadership who might have a different thought
Mhm.
theory about how you tell stories. And so you may be an advocate for those, for your organization in terms of ethical storytelling. And so one, I think it takes time, and then you're going to have to repeat yourself over and over again. And then sometimes you have to ask people to put themselves in those shoes. If it was you and you were experiencing X, Y, and Z, would you want? And then see if you could change the dial that way if you're having some issues with support, leadership changes, donor feedback, so on and so forth. I think those are ways to combat that, but it does take time.
Yeah. Okay, cool. All right. So now we're getting into composite storytelling. And this is from Mark. For Maria and Jennifer, we often share composite stories, and I'm curious to hear about any ethical concerns. Now, I think we did talk about them a little
Yeah.
bit, but maybe we can expand, 'cause I think they're so powerful when you do this. So,
Right.
well, Maria, why don't you get us
Yeah,
started?
I can kick off, Jennifer. So I teach a lot about composite storytelling, and there's always a journalist in the room, and there's always a journalist whose claws come out. And Holly, I really actually am curious what Holly thinks about composite storytelling too, as a former journalist, because you are trained as a journalist to not combine stories. So I do find that people were trauma informed and ethical storytelling kind of are a little bit at odds when it comes to composite storytelling, because you're not, it might be perceived that you're not telling an authentic story. And to that, I'll just also kind of say what I said before. That's fair. Like, that's very fair. And I think that we need to and say this is the thing, that Family for Sanctuaries video, I share it all the time. The only thing that I would suggest to that team is to have something, just a one slide in the beginning saying that this is a composite story. Probably don't use the word composite story because that's not layman language, but this is a common story in our community. A sentence or two, so people have an understanding. Something I grapple with, Jennifer, curious your thoughts, but also Holly, I'm really curious what your thoughts are from a journalist perspective.
Oh, thanks. I mean, the idea of a composite story in order to protect anonymity or to tell a story that you want to bring pieces of different people's stories together to tell a whole, right? It can be very enticing. One of the things that we have at RAIN is the ability to revoke your consent for a story to be told at any point. So we have to consider, when you're telling a composite story, what are the ramifications of a composite story where someone can revoke their consent if they have agreed to tell, in a non-anonymous context,
good,
right?
yeah.
And there are a couple of considerations, right? You have to put in, so for example, a video or a PSA where you have invested considerable organizational funds in order to tell that story, and then consent is revoked. What do you do? What is the obligation to all the other people who were part of that story? And those are the conversations we have to have. So, and also consent can be revoked anonymous or not anonymous. It is your story. You get to pull it back, whether you have decided to just use initials or something to anonymize it. So those are some considerations. We have a content strategist who their entire focus is, well, not entire focus, one of their focuses is a nonprofit after all. But a huge part of their focus is to look at what is the tracking, the awareness of where stories go. What are those tendrils? Because a good story told once is almost a waste of a good story. You want to be able to tell this story in many different ways. What are all the tendrils that story has gone into throughout your entire nonprofit? What's the social post? What's the news clip? What's the fundraising piece? And so we have somebody who's trying to track all of those tendrils to pull them together so that when someone says, I don't want my story told anymore, or I want to anonymize my story. We at the very least have a roadmap to begin that process. And that's something that we've learned some lessons on over time. And I think most lessons you learn the harder way, and we're trying to figure that out too.
Really nice, but I gotta say, my father is also a proponent of that you should never tell a story just once.
I love that. I love that. Agree.
Maybe it's an Italian thing. I don't know.
That's
Holly,
hilarious.
anything to
Um,
add to that?
No, I love what you shared, Jennifer, about sharing that good story multiple places, but tracking. That's really good. Maria, that's funny you asked, because I remember after switching from the newspaper to here, the first like grant report I was helping edit. I remember there was a composite story in there, and I was like, wait, what is this?
Your
Like,
stomach
oh,
went
it's an
Yeah.
example of what people might go through. I'm like, what? This is not, it was, so I guess my initial instinct was like, I didn't want, but yeah, it's interesting conversation, because in certain nonprofit circles, there's not an easy way to respectfully, to protect people, if you're gonna use, so I think it could be done well, but yeah, my initial instinct was, oh, I didn't like it.
Yeah, and that's interesting about having to decouple it somehow. Like if you tell this composite story and one person says, I'm out, what do you do?
Right.
So I'm glad you brought that. I guess I never thought about that before. It's really good. Cool. All right. Well, this is another question. This is about fundraising strategy. And when we went through the questions before, everybody said that they thought this was a good question. So we want to make sure we get it in. We're making really good time today. This is from Kathleen. And this for specifically, it says Jennifer, Daria, but I think anybody can definitely chime in. Regarding fundraising, how important is it for a donor to associate a story or testimonial with a face or name in order for it to have the intended impact, kind of like psychologically, or so it'd be great to hear your guys' thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'm going to dismantle something right off the bat, if
Love it.
the fundraisers in the audience will forgive me, and that's that donor isn't an audience, it's an action. And why I say that and why I think that's important. And feel free to arm wrestle me. That's totally cool. But one of the reasons that when we talk about motivating a person to donate and we talk about stories is I think it's not just about donors. I think it's humans. Humans want to either see a person, see a face, see a background, understand a connection to a story, to say, I understand that, I connect with it, and now I will do X. Or often on the other side, that could never be me. That person's story there, and that's a distancing tactic that people will use. That's a human thing that people do. So when your fundraising team comes to you and says, we need to show their faces, I get it. I really do, because they are trying to use a shorthand, a Cliff Notes version to get to the quickest point possible, because you have such short attention spans, such a limited amount of time to get people's attention. And they're trying to use that shorthand to say, see this person could be you. This person could be somebody that you care about. Their story is something you resonate with. So when a fundraising team says that this is important, I don't disagree. It doesn't mean that it has to still happen. You can acknowledge that it's still important
Of
and
course.
still make a different choice, and recognize that there are going to be then gives and takes there. Maybe that email won't perform as well. Maybe the conversation will have to be, okay, we're going to need to have a person in here because this email didn't perform as well. We didn't get as many donations. We didn't get as much engagement. Not as many people signed this petition because they couldn't make that connection. And we're going to have to work harder as storytellers to get to a point where we can tell that and we can non-anonymize it if that's what's needed. But yeah, that's my hot take. Donors aren't an audience.
Love it.
Come at me in the chat.
We're here for it. We're here for hot takes on a Wednesday.
There, yeah.
Yeah, I would say also, I mean, sometimes when I worked for the nonprofit law firm, I mean, no one can really imagine themselves needing legal services. And so we would use that tactic, like, this may not be for you, but your neighbor, your sister, everybody, your church member may be experiencing this right now, and kind of describe situations. And that really brought people close without us having to put a person in front of that. If you just take a minute, you close your eyes and you start describing the situation in your writing and in your storytelling, how we tell the story could help a lot. And so those were some of the things we did, because domestic violence was one of the issues that we worked with in the law firm. Tax issues. No one wants to raise their hand and say, I'm dealing with the IRS. And so I think that, but describing that, if I said, if the IRS sent you a letter today and just left it, I mean, dang, it helps. And so we would use tactics like that to try to, not tell people's show faces and tell stories, but make it relatable.
Yeah, anybody else to chime in? I think it's we talk about stuff like this all the time internally, because you want to anonymize these things, but the human brain works the way it works, right? It's
Yes.
built up thousands of however many years, a lot more than thousands. Cool. All right, we have time for a few more questions. Okay, this I thought was a really good one, and I don't know if you guys maybe have this experience. So, if you don't have this experience, maybe we could just talk about it abstractly. But privacy breach, and this is from Catherine, and for any panelist, how do you navigate when an anonymity was planned, but for somehow was breached and something happened? I don't know if you talk about experiences that you've had or experiences you've seen other people have, if you could share those, or just what you would recommend. Anyone can chime in on this one. I feel like we all touch it in some way.
Yeah, Holly, you kind of had a story like that where it kind of got into the wrong hands.
Yeah, and
How
this
did you
one was
handle it?
interesting because they didn't ask for anonymity at first, but I think
Right.
we weren't predicting the scope, and maybe we should have. So that one wasn't necessarily a breach, but it was an example of how, even if it's local news or locally shared, this stuff is available worldwide. So keep that in mind with protection.
Did you have to engage with them, and was there like
We
how did you guys kind of deal with it?
So, we had shared some other information about them on our website, and at time we've pulled, at times when they've needed more privacy, we have pulled stuff off of our website to our control. And that's something I try to share with people too. Like, you can always revoke your consent with us, but if it's in another outlet's hands or other digital shares, like we will control what we can control. So I think if there was a breach, like communication, instant communication, clear communication, and then controlling what you can control wherever you can, and providing other support that they might need.
Great.
One thing I do want to add is make the pathways to the marketing comms team so easy. We don't think to make that information accessible. But if that's your story, or someone's story and you're like, oh, actually that information could be really dangerous, where on your website can someone just get in touch very quickly? Because we do need to quickly take things down when there is a breach like that.
And almost having like an SOP where it's like, when this happens,
Right.
this is what we found. You make that public and you share it with
Right.
with people. We have a policy for this.
Right.
Anything else to share? Otherwise, I think that's so interesting. Daria.
Yeah, I was going to say I had a situation where the organization was trying to catalog some things over time. And there was a story that had been taken some time ago that was reposted. And there were details, and the new team had no knowledge of the story, but there were details that were not accurate, that were taken at that point in time, and it was reused content. So it's not exactly the same, but it is the same, because when that person seeing the story, it was trauma for them, because they said, hey, that wasn't even accurate in the first place. And so I think that those situations come up, and in that situation, we had to walk it back. Took the story down. We had to apologize. It's your decision. It's your choice. How do you want us to fix this? We can rewrite this story. We can re-record this story. We can remove it. You don't have to share it anymore. you can go back and change some of those things. So that can come up from time to time because at that point in time, the person felt like that the services that was represented wasn't represented well. And so and it just happened. So you have to be careful when you're reusing content that you may have not been the owner of.
I'd also throw in there, I have learned a lot more about tech than I ever thought I was going to learn when I wandered into a journalism major, and become really friendly with your tech team and all of those SOPs that you guys are talking about. Like, incorporate what is the process that you're going to work with your tech team in order to make sure that things come down. And that also things aren't then found in search nodes or I mean, there's so many like weird hidden paths that are beyond just where the story goes. So become friendly with your tech team.
Yeah. Well, we got one bonus, and then we'll get to the closeout question. But I feel like this comes up a lot, and I'll kind of adjust the question a little bit. This is from Kayla. It's about stock image and AI use. Holly, Daria, but certainly anybody can chime in. Can you ethically tell a story anonymously and use stock photos or AI generated visuals to help tell the narrative? I'm sure we got a lot of opinions on AI, but it would be good to just kind of talk about that a little bit because that does come up a lot. Maria, you want to get us started?
Oh gosh. I am for stock. I think like
Pro stock.
I'm pro stock, and it's because I grew up in the public health space. I will say I watched, I forgot who sent it to me. It was wandering around LinkedIn, but it was an AI generated video of a pediatric cancer clinic, and it just hit me the wrong way. So I'm for AI, I'm for stock. I think we just have to like still do this with integrity, hold space for nuance. I even like as a business owner, I have some people that they share their testimonials with their image, and if they don't want to use their image, then I'll use maybe a stock footage of someone on a computer that you don't see their face, or cough, like there are interesting ways to use. And also, stock images have come a long way than they were 20 years ago, where they were just so awful and staged. There are some that have much more diverse images, things that are much more representative of the folks that you serve. So yeah, let's just hold space for like a little bit of case by case. AI, like if you can have AI illustrate something or do a comic, and that's going to save you time and keep your story anonymous, do it. Like, that's great. I'd love to know how a story like that would pan out.
I saw a good comment in the chat. I don't usually keep it open, but I apologize if I say your name wrong. Cyrita Wilkins. The problem with a lot of stock image websites is they often don't accurately represent certain communities of color, people with disabilities, or even people with larger bodies. I think that does become a problem is negotiating those waters.
So I recommend Unsplash. I think Unsplash has both free and paid. Disability beautiful. I love that. Yeah, I look at Unsplash, and I think that Canva has purchased a lot of Unsplash images. So even the Canva images you get. So if it's been a minute since you looked at stock, head over to Unsplash, and I think you'd be surprised at the diversity of images in there.
Cool. All right, well, we'll get to our last question then. Thanks, Maria, for taking us home there. And this one is just a general wrap-up question. We'll go Holly, Daria, Jennifer, and then Maria. What is one final thought you'd like to leave our audience with today? It can be something we didn't have time to discuss or something that you personally would like to reiterate and elevate. It was Holly. We'll start with you, Holly.
Thanks. I almost got too distracted by this happening chat. You guys are
I
brilliant.
know, it's
I'm
really moving
enjoying
today.
this
All
chat.
right.
Thanks everyone for being here and for caring about this. I'm so encouraged to see the ethical storytelling report that MemoryFox put together. This is such important work. As someone who, consumes a lot of social media, I'm so glad we're moving away from that poor child crying and dirty, and it's just so I'm so glad that the industry is moving. Maybe it already was there, but like the resilient stories, the agency, the connectedness, we're all humans. I think it's really cool to see, and I'm glad that you're doing this important work at a time when it feels very hard to connect as humans. And so having true, authentic, empowering story partnerships is beautiful. So thank you all for that. I think that's, yeah, my final thought.
Yeah, nice. Well, thank you. You do it. We're all part of this together. I think it takes a village, as they say. But Marie, oh, no, Daria's next.
I've said it multiple times. I think it's a process. And so if you're sitting there now thinking like, I need to revamp my whole workflow, it's a process. It's going to take time. But the thing that keeps me focused on ethical storytelling is that I look at every story like it's my own story. And I'd say, would I want myself represented like this? Would I want to, would I want someone to just post me without asking? And it helps me to slow down. I'm in this work. I do this day to day. I'm fundraising with you all. And so that's what helps me. I just slow down and say, wait a minute, I need to make a call and make sure that they know that I'm sharing the story. Wait a minute, because that's what I would want someone to do for me. So that's what I do.
Beautiful.
I'm
Jennifer.
gonna take that lesson with me big time, Daria. So thank you for sharing that. That's gonna go on my many Post-it notes on my screen as daily reminders. I'll share something, and I'd shared this with Maria before. We're gonna make a lot of mistakes. And we are going to, in a lot of ways, make a lot of mistakes because we're gonna believe that we have learned what that we've arrived. I come out of a world where we were proud that we weren't telling those stories anymore. Look at us, we're not telling those stories about the children with the flies and we were saying we've evolved, we've gotten there. And I sat there for too many years going, yes, I have evolved, I have learned. And then I make a mistake. And then I realize that I've got more evolution to do. And then you come to the existential crisis of realizing you may never stop that. But it's okay. It's okay. And it's where we are. And we keep learning and keep doing things like this.
Wonderful.
Oh, so well said, Jennifer. So well said, everybody. And I guess just to piggyback on what everybody is saying, stories change lives, y'all. Like what you're doing is so deeply foundational to move your mission. And it's not easy. It's really, really not easy. A lot of things that we've said here, it takes work, it takes being organized, it takes a team, it takes being bold and making decisions like, at a drop. So we love you, and I'm just so honored to be in this space with you today. And keep going. And thank you for the work that you're doing through telling impactful stories.
Cool. Well, thank you all so much for being here today and sharing all this great information. I mean, this is like our obsession at MemoryFox, of course, is how do we build all this stuff? Try to make it easier. Look, thank you all for being here today. Thank you all for your input in the chat. It was probably the most active chat I think that I've seen. So it's just really great to see this community come around this cause and all the great thought leaders in the space. And it's just a real honor to be able to support you all. Carly is going to personally invite each one of you to a community demo. We are hosting next week, so don't be shocked if you see it pop up on your calendar. It's just going to be a quick 30-minute overview of how MemoryFox works, how it enables ethical storytelling, and authentic storytelling, which is our obsession. So I hope to see you there. Of course, you can always book a time with us to discuss your ethical storytelling goals one-on-one with my team. But most of all, I want to thank you all for your service to your communities and your commitment to making the world a better, more ethical place. Keep pressing on. Thank you all. Have a great day and take care.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye now.